Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Reds Rundown podcast, hosted by two lifelong Reds fans and journalists. I'm Rob. He's Joe, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Joe, while the other episode that we have recorded, well, the other two that we've recorded in the last, I guess, 7-ish days have been a little bit more upbeat. This one comes with a somber note as we're going to be talking about the passing away of Pete Rose, one of the all-time great baseball players, regardless of how you feel about him personally. You can let us know in the comment section below what you guys think of Pete Rose. Should he be in the Hall of Fame? Should he not? A lot of us have always thought that maybe once he passed away, he would get in. The more and more I read about it, I'm not so sure. So we will have to see about that. We do not have an update about that this quickly, but Joe, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk here first a little bit about Pete Rose. I know you've even had a personal experience with Pete Rose, and I guess, you know what, real quick before I say that, Pete Rose died at 83. He passed away at 83 years old. They say from natural causes. He had been sick for a little while. He is the all-time leading hit record in baseball with 4,256 hits. He is the all-time leader in games played at 3,562, at bats 14,053, singles 3,215, and outs at 10,328. He was part of the Big Red Machine, won 3 World Series championships, 3 batting titles, 1 MVP, 2 Gold Gloves, and was Rookie of the Year. He was an All-Star in 17 years. And he was able to play a plethora of different positions. He created, or became known as Charlie Hustle as well, due to the fact that he hustled as well and put as much effort in as anybody else. He also was the last player manager in baseball history, as he was the player manager for the Reds for a little while there. And ultimately, he managed the Reds from 1984 to 1989, the year right before they won the World Series with Lou Piniella. He is also, unfortunately, known as one of the only players in baseball history to be banned from baseball for betting on baseball while as a player and a manager. And there are a couple other things that he is known for and was subsequently banned from baseball in 1989 for that. Joe, I think we'll just get started from there. What are your thoughts on the death of Peter Edward Rose Sr.?
Yeah, it's sad for a lot of Reds fans who got a chance to see him play. Obviously, we did not. We were a little bit younger than that, but really, I think he's kind of a piece of baseball past that I think he's kind of been lost. Guy who was going to play every day, was going to hustle, was willing to move positions when asked, and do it for the betterment of the team. All he wanted to do was win. Appreciated that he hit for contact so well and like knew that that's what he was good at and kind of leaned into it. This is a guy that at least on the field everyone needs to be looking up to on how to play the game,
Mm-hmm.
and just having that mentality of doing anything to win. And yeah, he brought a lot of joy to Cincinnati for the records that he broke, for the World Series that he helped to win, and it's sad that he's passed away now. When so many people have looked up to him, that he was their hero. I know people around my parents' age, that was kind of their thing. Is like he's my guy. He's the guy I love going to the ballpark to watch. And there's no better lesson out there than watching Charlie Hustle play to like give everything your best and give everything your best shot, or else what are we doing out here?
Yeah, it is really sad based on, this man was a superhero in Cincinnati, right? Through the 70s, 80s, for sure. He played his first game, though, in 1963, which people do not realize. He played for the Reds for 15 years before going over to the Phillies and helping them have a nice run there for 4 years as well. He had a brief stint with the Expos before coming back to the Reds. He was born in Cincinnati as well, which made things even better, right? He was able to, be known as the Cincinnati guy during a time where the Big Red Machine was dominating baseball. And he is still considered to be, well, and that's still considered to be, I should say, one of the best teams of all time. With little doubt, I think anybody who would argue differently is, I think, wild to me. They're right up there with Murderers Row and some of the other insane lineups that we've seen even over the last few years. If you think that some of these Dodger, lineups or even Astro lineups or anything were crazy, even the Yankees in the early 2000s and 90s, they were nothing compared to how dominant the Big Red Machine was, and how they were led by the guy who had been there for many years, right? The Joe Morgans and others were not, like, some of them weren't from Cincinnati. Some of them did not start their careers in Cincinnati. Some of them came in and became a part of the Big Red Machine. It's kind of crazy to think about the fact that Pete Rose had almost been here a decade already by the time some of these teams started getting put together. And so to see him do what he did is incredible, to say the least. The man got on base. He knew how to do it. It's just sad because his checkered past is what, or his, I guess, second life almost, I will call it, is what ultimately ended up costing him his Super Bowl or his Superman identity. And it crushed a lot of Cincinnati fans. Luckily, they were able to slightly forget about it in 1990, winning the World Series just after his banishment from baseball. But Joe, it's just tough to think about the fact that he did a lot of very sketchy and, I would say, dishonorable things outside of baseball, especially as he got later into his career and he could feel maybe the superstardom starting to fade away from him. I know you watched recently the HBO documentary, I believe it's HBO documentary, on Pete Rose. I've not gotten around to doing that yet. I sincerely plan on doing so, but from what you've told me and what I've heard from everybody else, this man was given a thousand chances, it feels like, to do something better and be better. He just was incapable of making those decisions, and he spent a lot of his later life in the Sin City, in Las Vegas, kind of putzing around, trying to sell off autographs and everything. He blew through so much of his own money. That's even where he passed away, was in Las Vegas. It's just sad to see the fact that he just couldn't take the chances that were given to him, the lifelines that were given to him, and actually make the decisions necessary to put himself in a better standing.
Yeah, it really was like a guy who, I mean, I guess we'll never know if he really bet on baseball when he was playing, but it felt like he knew the end of the days were coming in terms of his playing career, and he needed some sort of rush. And
Yep.
gambling can do that to people. Hopefully everyone gambles responsibly out there if they do that. Um, but then after he went to managing, it just seemed like that was kind of the case. Like this is a guy who was so competitive that he probably held on for about 5 or 6 years too long to try to break this record, Ty Cobb's hit record, because he's so competitive, and that's what made him great. But that's also kind of his downfall, and that's kind of something I think we can all take a lesson from too. Is like it's really good to have the competitiveness and that ability to work hard, but you can also fly too close to the sun. I think that's what happened. It is very sad that he is not in the Hall of Fame. It's very sad that they did not put him in the Hall of Fame while he was living. That all being said, you're right, Rob. It's more what point do we believe him with the story changing so many times over the years? First, he didn't bet on baseball, then he did bet on baseball. He bet on the Reds when he was a manager. Just don't know why that changed or what was going on. I wish he would have just come clean as soon as possible. And that's kind of the probably why he is where he is. Like the gambling on baseball was bad, but it seems like his lying about it has kind of hurt any chance of a second chance by most commissioners that have come through. He felt like in that documentary he was going to be like a 1 year banishment and then be able to come back and be reinstated in baseball. But I know we're going to have a little bit more discussion about whether he should be in the Hall of Fame, but it does stink that maybe he thought that was the deal. But always read the fine print when you're going to sign documents like that is all I can say, because it's sad that he never got that chance. That's always wanted in the last 40 years since he's pretty much been done playing is to be in the Hall of Fame and to be honored with the greats. He still goes up to Cooperstown all the time. I went to Cooperstown and we were wearing Red stuff, and they said, "Oh, that's where Pete Rose usually sits. It's cool that Reds fans are sitting there." So it's just something he really wanted, and it's sad that he can't have that. And again, the mistake was bad, but then lying about the mistake just made it worse, and that's what's sad about it.
Well, and what's interesting is now we are in the world that everybody's talked about since I can remember growing up, as I was born not too long after his banishment. But most of my entire life, I've heard that he would be put into the Baseball Hall of Fame once he passed away. He is in the Reds Hall of Fame. He is his number is retired, I believe, as well by the Cincinnati Reds. They honored him big time. I think it was in 2014. And it's pretty crazy to see just how much he is revered still here in this city. There are people who will fight you over the fact that he should still be in the Hall of Fame. He didn't do anything wrong. Baseball screwed him over. I'll never be a baseball fan. I'll never watch a Reds game or anything because of the fact that Pete Rose didn't get into the Hall of Fame. And now we're at that point, Joe. What is going to happen with him? Do you think the commissioner will reinstate him to be able to be put in the Hall of Fame? That's going to be talked about this entire offseason because this is the opportunity for them to do that. I'm not really convinced that they will. They probably should, because regardless of the man who he was, and while he was a danger to betting, and he did break all the rules, at this point it would just feel petty to me for him not to get in. And I will be honest with you, I've never cared if he got in. I know that there are probably going to be a lot of Reds fans, including potentially your parents, Joe, and my parents, who are going to be upset with me about it. I just didn't watch him play. I understand that he was a superhero for them, but it did not affect me one way or another if he got in. It's not like the Bengals where they had literally nobody in other than Anthony Munoz, where I'm like, hey, we need to get somebody else in there. The Reds have a lot of historical players throughout their time who have made their way into Cooperstown. That being said, while I do not personally care, I do think that it is crazy not to have specifically Pete Rose in there. There's just no way. The guy with the most hits, the most games played, such a storied career. Like, without Pete Rose, a lot of baseball history is very, very different. And I think that if you're that important to baseball history, whether infamous or famous, you deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, at least for the records that he did break and for the playing career that he did have. That's just my opinion on it. I think that the man was too competitive, I think, to actually bet for his team to lose, to be honest with you. And let's be real, that team literally won a World Series the very next year. One of the more fluky ones, the wire-to-wire series, or season, if we're being honest. They weren't necessarily the most talented team, but it's just, to me, the fact that he holds all these records, a 24-year history in a game that has 100 years plus. The fact that, he was in baseball for a fifth of its lifetime so far, essentially, and did all the things that he did. I believe that he should get in at some point soon. And it will be interesting to see if Rob Manfred tries to maybe even salvage some points with people, some older folks, to try to put him in there and maybe see if he can, break up some of the scrutiny that he is having on a very consistent basis.
Yeah, there's definitely rumors out there that he bet against the Reds. It's definitely impacting the game, whether he did or not, because you can bet on your team to win, and then the next day not have the best pitcher available or whatever. So,
Yep.
I don't know. For me, that doesn't matter at this point. What he bet on, and what he didn't bet on. My initial inclination is they're not going to put him in right away because that's a severe slap in the face. So maybe not like this offseason, but in 4 or 5 years' times they might. A lot of it comes down to, like, what do you do with Julius Joe Jackson? He's still not in the Hall of Fame either.
That's a good point.
And that's a lot of the similar issues there with the gambling and taking money, and even some reports that Joe Jackson didn't take the money or he didn't throw the World Series because his batting average was too high and he played too well in that 1919 World Series. So I don't know. I feel like they'll still probably put him in after a while, 4 to 5 years time, but not right now, because that would be such a black mark on the Major League Baseball to be like, oh, he just died, let's put him in. I will say my personal beliefs are he should be in the Hall of Fame. Shoeless Joe should be in the Hall of Fame.
I agree.
All the steroid users should be in the Hall of Fame, and it should just say right on the plaque, hey, this guy bet on baseball. This guy used steroids. And even if you want to do, I think Marty, maybe Tom Brennan, one of the two, would suggest having a separate room for people who did tarnish the game, however you want to interpret that, whether it's gambling or steroids. Doing that might be good, but the whole purpose of the Hall of Fame is to remember the all-time greats, and that's for me. Like, it was so cool going to Cooperstown and just seeing all the plaques and like, oh, I know that guy. I'm going to read his plaque, and like I could have been in there for hours if I wasn't dragged out by my family. Um, and it's to preserve that history of the game, with and even though it's not the same thing, Pete Rose and the people who use steroids are going to be forever linked because they're not getting in the Hall of Fame. And there's this huge era, specifically from, Pete's like the first of his era, maybe not to get in, that maybe should be in. But then there's the whole, 90s to 2000s steroids guys not getting in, where you're missing a lot of baseball's history. And I don't agree with that. I do agree there should be some sort of punishment. I don't know what that is. But they changed the rules to keep Pete Rose out of the Hall of Fame. This is something they talk about in the documentary, where there was never a rule saying he couldn't be voted into the Hall of Fame. And then then the Pro Baseball Hall of Fame, sorry, not Major League Baseball, Pro Baseball Hall of Fame made a rule change saying that if you were on the list by the commissioner to be banned from baseball, then you couldn't be voted in, because it was a way to take the decision out of their own hands and not look bad on themselves. Joe Morgan made a lot of pushes because he was on the Baseball Hall of Fame committee over the years to get him in. Sometimes Pete wouldn't step up to the plate and do what he was supposed to do. Sometimes Joe Morgan could convince other guys on the board to kind of change that rule. Yeah, I think that's my going forward is, I would say he should be in the Hall of Fame, and it should just say right on the plaque, he bet on baseball. We don't even know if he bet on his own team, on the other team. Never figured that part out, but just whatever it has to say, hey, this guy's the hit king. He played the game hard, won 3 World Series, 2 with the Reds, 1 with the Phillies, and that's how it should be in my mind, to remember all the history in the game. Because the other thing people don't understand, Rob, is like a lot of his stuff is in the Hall of Fame. He just doesn't have that plaque. Like, they have his jerseys, they have some of his bats from all those hits that he's had, but they don't have that plaque, and that's what he really wanted. So I would love to see him get the Hall of Fame, just to honor that and to kind of remember some of these Big Red Machine teams by themselves. That just, to me, is how it should be done, regardless of whether people think he should be in because of the gambling stuff.
Yeah, and let's be honest, the Hall of Fame is a museum, right? And if you don't have all of the history in there, then it's not a full museum. It's not a complete museum. And so it is, in history, as somebody who has a lot of experience with history, I will say, through my different times in college, it's interesting because it's always like the victor writes the histories, right? Ultimately, baseball controls, the commissioner's office controls a lot of baseball, and clearly they decided that this was what needed to be done to make an example. We did have, who was it recently? Oh my goodness, 1 second. There was a player recently who got banned for betting on baseball as well. Do you remember his name, Joe? Here we go. I got it. Tucupita Marcano was banned this year for betting on his own team's games. I believe he was with the Padres at the time. So, like, they still hold to that. It's not like they're, only kind of doing it. Betting has always been a blemish on baseball, whether it's Shoeless Joe for the things that the 1919, well, they call them the Black Sox, right? What they did, and for what Pete Rose has done, and what Tucupita Marcano has now done. I didn't realize that Roberto Alomar was also banned for sexual misconduct. So it's like, it's interesting that they kind of hold such an ethical standard as well. And it will be worth watching over the next few years if that is going to change or not, because this will not be a debate that I think will go away soon. It will eventually fade, I would have to think. Most of the people who care that much about Pete Rose will pass on, and I think baseball will eventually be done with it. But I think, like you said, maybe they wait a little bit. I didn't really think about the fact that it would be a black mark if they just like did it this offseason, because it would be proving a point, I guess, to everybody. And maybe that is the point. Maybe that's the last thing that Pete Rose is giving to baseball, is that he is a point that needed to be made to keep people from doing what there are a lot of issues in specifically soccer with right now in the world, where games are thrown, even in esports. Joe, I don't know if you know this, and for those of you who don't know, I'm more on the gaming side of things, but even just as recently as I think a couple of days ago from the recording of this podcast, there were teams that were kicked out of the Valorant Championship Series because they were throwing games based on betting. So maybe he unintentionally protected some of the integrity of baseball with his ban. I don't know. But I do personally believe as well that he should get in. I have no personal attachments to it. My dad even doesn't, I don't really think, even though he did love Pete Rose. We'll have to see what they're going to do. But I guess, Joe, I'll throw it to you for any last thoughts here on the Pete Rose, on the death of Pete Rose and his legacy. And then I think we'll sign off for the day.
Yeah, a player that was consistent, hustled, and you have to love that about that. And I know that's what the Hall of Fame's about, is just showing what they did on the field. And if they can just make a way to get him, just putting a little note on there saying, hey, he just, well, and the integrity of the game possibly was at stake. That's what I would say would be right, just to kind of reiterate that. But we might all consistency, like I was saying. Jay Kuda is a Twitter account that puts out some interesting stats, and for the Pete Rose, he put out one that was kind of fun. Day games and night games, 303 in each. So good vision, even at night. AstroTurf and grass, 303 batting average on each. So 303 across all four of those little sectors. So very interesting that he was able to show that consistency. And, he talked about all the time, especially when he's on his later years when he was on Fox, about how awesome it was to be a switch hitter because how much of a matchup advantage that is. I have to face sliders, basically, because it's breaking away from you. And I think that really did help him in his career, being such a good hitter from both sides of the plate. So that consistency, again, in that stat, it was just kind of shocking to me that he was able to do so many different at-bats at different ballparks at different times of day, and it was all kind of the same 303 average.
Yeah, and I guess for me, look, I don't know that anybody's ever going to get 42-56. I just, that is one of the, I think, truly unbreakable records in baseball. I mean, if you go and you look, I mean, even in his second to last year, he was an all-star. He had 107 hits. He still hit 264 at 44 years old. And if you look at the amount of plate appearances that he was getting, I mean, he was playing in basically every single game for 24 seasons. It is pretty incredible to see. And it's a sad day for those in Cincinnati, and it's definitely disappointing that there was just no way for him to get in during his lifetime. And for those in his family and everything, obviously, we'll have to hope that they get the resolution to this in their lifetimes, so that he can go in as the true hit king of baseball. But I think that is going to do it for us on this episode, Joe. We'll have more coming to you guys over at the Reds Rundown channel. Make sure to like and subscribe. We'll have more Reds updates as soon as anything else comes out. Be on the lookout, because, I don't know, Joe and I love Reds baseball, and with the managerial signing and some of the interesting things that will happen this offseason, I have no doubt that there will be more coming as we prep for the 2025 season. But with that, guys, we'll catch you on the next one.